What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the MMA Fast. Today, let's get started with Diego Lopes calls to face Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 312, an interim title fight. If Ilia Topuria is taking time off, Diego Lopes wants Alexander Volkanovski at UFC 312 in Australia. Heading into the fight, Ilia Topuria promised to hand the Hawaiian his first knockout loss. In the end, it took under 3 rounds for the champion to make good on his word. Sitting cage side was Alexander Volkanovski, who hoped to face El Matador post-fight. However, Topuria shot down the rematch taking place anytime soon, saying that he needs to take time off. However, Alexander Volkanovski still wants to fight at UFC 312 in Sydney. While the Great is willing to wait to face Ilia Topuria, he now has an offer from Diego Lopes. Speaking in a recent interview, Diego Lopes discussed the possible matchup. As the backup fighter for UFC 308's main event over the weekend, he believes that he also deserves a title shot. Ilia mentioned on Saturday night that he wants to take some time off. The UFC also mentioned that they're not really working on a date for Spain yet. It would make the most sense to fight Volk in Sydney for the interim title. Volk has already suggested this, and I've already agreed to it. Let's just do it. It all just makes sense. Ilia wants to take some time off, and Ilia wants to fight in Spain for his next title defense. Volk doesn't want to wait. Volk wants to fight. I want to fight. I don't mind flying to Sydney to fight him. Marlon Vera makes his opinion clear on UFC return and shares potential opponent and timeline. Marlon Vera recently disclosed when he'd like to return to the octagon and expressed interest in fighting a former champion. He indicated that he is not aiming for an extended layoff, but a bout this year is unlikely. During his latest appearance on the Ariel Helwani show, Cheeto expressed interest in returning to the octagon in the first quarter of 2025 and named former 2-division champion Henry Cejudo as a potential opponent. Cejudo is coming off back-to-back losses to Aljamain Sterling and reigning bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili, so a bout with Cheeto would be logical. I think January. Los Angeles can be great for me, so I could have my own crowd. Los Angeles could be good, or Mexico City for the main event. And I mean, the guy ahead of me is Henry Cejudo. We'll see. I think that's a great fight. Javier Mendez doesn't think Ilia Topuria can hang with Islam Makhachev on the ground. After becoming the first fighter to knock out Max Holloway at UFC 308, featherweight champion Topuria continued to express interest in a fight with lightweight champion Islam Makhachev. Topuria is confident that he can submit Makhachev, but American Kickboxing Academy head coach Javier Mendez thinks it wouldn't be wise for Topuria to tangle with Makhachev on the ground. That's not a smart move, you know? And it just would be like, if Ilia decided to go submission for submission with Islam, that's not a smart move on his part either. So it's all strategy and how you approach it, how your fighter approaches it, and what mistakes you can correct while the fight is going on. That's what I think is more important than anything. When the fight does get matched, it's just your game plan, your strategy, executing it. Whether he can hang with Islam or not on the ground, I would have to say no, based on what I see with everybody and Islam. The only person that really did the most with him was Khabib, and at the end of the day, the longer you grapple with Islam, the worse it's going to get. Khamzat Chimaev shares theory about Bo Nickal's missed opportunity to fight him at UFC 308. Khamzat Chimaev recently weighed in on Bo Nickal's missed shot at squaring off against him at UFC 308. Chimaev was originally scheduled to face Whitaker at UFC Saudi Arabia in June, but had to withdraw due to a severe illness. During that time, Nickal was offered the chance to step in on short notice against Robert, but he declined. The American wrestling phenom had previously expressed interest in a showdown with Chimaev at UFC 308, though the opportunity ultimately didn't materialize. During a recent interview, Khamzat shared his thoughts on why the UFC didn't grant Nickal a chance to fight him. The undefeated Chechen-born fighter said that the promotion recognizes he would be too challenging for the relatively inexperienced Nickal. Why is it they didn't pick him? I don't know, because they think the guy is too early for him, too young. I don't know how old he is, but in MMA, it doesn't mean that your age determines if you're prepared to fight. The guy is too young for the sport. Maybe later when I'm older, he'll give me a tougher fight, but I'm for sure gonna win that time as well. Ilia Topuria's coach reveals why he expects a more dangerous Volkanovski in the rematch. Despite the incredible run that Alexander Volkanovski went on as the featherweight champion, he's going to be the underdog in his upcoming rematch with Ilia Topuria. When the two men exchanged pleasantries inside the octagon this past weekend at UFC 308, it was clear that this fight would be next, but there's some big question marks hanging over it. In a recent interview with Submission Radio, this is something that Topuria's coach drew attention to as why they cannot afford to take this rematch lightly, just because they've beaten their next opponent before. I think Volk in a rematch is going to be more dangerous than the first time because I think when he take the fight is not the moment for fight with Ilia. If I'm his coach, I'm going to tell Volk in that moment is not the right moment. You have a knockout, you have a fight, I don't remember exactly. 2 months and you have a knockout. I think he have the time for recovery and to think and do a better strategy with Ilia. Tom Aspinall teases move to the WWE after wrapping UFC career. Interim UFC heavyweight champion Tom Aspinall is seemingly interested in heading to the WWE. Earlier this month, the interim UFC heavyweight champion appeared in the WWE ring at a house show in Manchester. Speaking in a recent interview, Tom Aspinall discussed the WWE appearance. In the interview, the UFC champion admitted that he's also interested in joining the likes of Michael Bisping to do analysis in the future. However, Aspinall is also down to move to the world of professional wrestling after he's done fighting. Absolutely, mate. That's what I want to do in my post-fighting career. I've got my show on TNT Sports now. I'm very passionate about MMA. It's been in my life for as long as I can remember. I like to think that I know more about MMA than most, and I can offer some kind of knowledge and breakdown to people who don't understand MMA as well as I do. But WWE is something new and exciting for me as well. It's another way to get out there in front of an audience and do something not quite as dangerous. I don't know. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I've still got a lot that I want to do in my MMA career. I'm not saying I want to hang up the gloves just yet, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy that. I enjoyed the whole thing. Daniel Cormier makes case for Ilia Topuria as Fighter of the Year over Alex Pereira. Daniel Cormier argues that Ilia Topuria's 2024 was more impressive than Alex Pereira's. Based on the level of competition, Daniel gives the nod to Topuria for Fighter of the Year over Pereira. The Fighter of the Year conversation felt like it was over. Like, Alex Pereira was the guy that was the Fighter of the Year, no questions asked. That's not the case. I think that these two wins singularly are as good as any 2 wins anybody can have. No disrespect to Jamal Hill, Iri Prochazka, and Khalil Roundtree. Topuria just beat the 2 best fighters of the generation prior, but they're still in this generation because they're both very, very young. He just beat 2 of the greatest featherweights of all time. There's only 3, and he beat 2 of them in a calendar year. He is the Fighter of the Year, and in my opinion, there is no questions to be asked. That result makes it true. Paul Felder told me it would be like Alex fighting John Jones and I in our prime, and knocking us both out in the same calendar year. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't know that he could have done that. Ilia just did it. Beat those guys in their prime. It was very, very impressive. Recently released UFC vet shares only way to bring Conor McGregor back. A recently released UFC veteran has weighed in on the ongoing discussion surrounding Conor McGregor's return to the octagon. After months of uncertainty, he shared what he believes to be the only way the Irishman could be lured back into competition. The Notorious has been linked to a return for well over a year and appeared to be nearing that when he coached The Ultimate Fighter opposite Michael Chandler. Earlier this year, McGregor vs. Chandler was made official to headline UFC 303 during the promotion's annual International Fight Week, but he withdrew from the bout due to a broken toe. The bout hasn't been rescheduled, and Iron is instead booked to fight Charles Oliveira in a rematch. With all the uncertainty surrounding the former 2-division champion's return, recently released UFC vet Brian Kelleher shared an interesting scenario that could pique his interest. One way to bring Conor back is him versus Max for the BMF belt.